Movement with our host, Dr. Jack Rocco. Dr. Jack, how are you? And we have a great guest today, don't we?
We do. I know you as adopted Connor. I don't actually know your last name.
That depends on which birth certificate.
Pardon me?
Depends on the birth certificate.
This is true. This is a problem that us adoptees have. Like, you find out you have one, two, sometimes more names. So we're just going to go with Connor. This is Connor.
I'm Connor Howe. You can call me Connor Howe.
Okay, Connor Howe. I've been stalking Connor of sorts online, mostly because I've got into the adoptee circle. I had my coming out of the fog moments, as we call it, several years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago when it really hit me big. I ended up online, Instagram, and like most social media and most issues, the predominance of posters and influencers out there are female, and there's very few males. I've happened to stumble across a few here and there, but Connor's one that really, you came on the scene, as far as I know, a couple years ago. When did you really start posting as you have been?
Actually, a year ago this month. So
so you have made meteoric rises on your platform with some of your messages. And I just want to introduce everyone to Connor Howe. If any of you know my story as an adoptee, I have my book out called Recycled. But like I said, Connor's someone who jumped out at me online. Yeah, there we go. And Connor's made a big splash in the world. He tends to take no shit and give plenty of it, which a lot of adoptees need. There's many different practices within the adoptee community that have affected a lot of us deeply and adversely, and Connor takes them on. Connor, I'm just going to pass it on to you. You explain and define yourself however you like, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. I was adopted I know of Jack that you're adopted in a closed adoption, baby scoop era. I was adopted in the 1990s when I was born. So I was adopted in kind of the first wave of open adoptions and grew up knowing who my mom was, biological mom, I should say, I guess, for clarification. Probably saw her about once a year, give or take, for the first 18 or so years of my life. Didn't really have a say in kind of what that relationship looked like. I don't really think anyone in my life really understood what that should look like, or what the goal was. It was just, this is better than closed adoption, where people are completely information restricted. And so I never really felt like I had the voice to say how I felt or to ask the questions I wanted to ask, or if I wanted to see my mom more, to be like, hey, I want to see my mom more. It took me 30 years to start even referring to her as just my mom without the caveat of birth mom or whatever. And then on the other side of my family, I have a biological father in Ireland. My mom got pregnant as a teenager living in Ireland, and he's a complete question mark. I've never met him. I've never met any of my siblings on that side of the family. I only know one or two things about him. And one of those things being that he basically doesn't want anything to do with me. Yeah, a really complicated life story, and growing up feeling a lot of complicated emotions and not really having any sort of, my adoptive family tried to get me in therapy and they did what they thought they could to try to help me figure out a lot of this stuff. But growing up, 1990s, 2000s, even 2010s, and even really in the 2020s, I wouldn't say many therapists, or obviously like the broad population, but definitely therapists. Most therapists don't really understand the complexities of being an adopted person. And then you add on top of that being in like an open adoption. It's like, not to say that's more difficult as a therapist to talk about, but this is like a brand new experience. So
yeah, I think my story was similar, and I think all of our stories are similar, but it's highlighted by the fact that you don't know that there are questions to ask. You don't know what you don't know. And I think a lot of adoptees are misled. I try not to take sides. I have empathy for all members of the triad, the child, the adoptive parents, and the birth parents, and even to a certain degree to the fourth leg of the table, which is the adoption entities, the organizations that are tasked with placing these children. But I think the biggest misnomer, the biggest problem that we face is that you're told right from the beginning, you're blessed, you're lucky, you're chosen, you're this special child that dropped from heaven in this immaculate conception of some sort. And whatever situation you're in, as an infant, as a child, it's irrelevant whether it's good or bad. you're just made to feel that you need to be grateful for that. Now, looking back into your younger years, were you plagued with that, with the open adoption? Because that's something that's different from my experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think every adopted person has this kind of, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I think most adopted people I've interacted with have felt that kind of obligation, the need to be grateful. Certainly when I was a kid, and anytime I had any issues in life, it was always like stopping a victim, or putting food on the table, or putting a roof over your head. And then on top of that, there's the adoption layer of what would your life be like if you weren't in this house? And I don't really think my adoptive family necessarily waved that over my head all the time, but it was definitely, no one has to say anything for an adopted person to feel that. Like, I have an adoptive brother who was born 4 months after I was adopted, basically an Irish twin situation. And they try to treat us exactly the same. But that's impossible. It's an impossible task. And definitely when you're the person that feels like, I'm the one that's different here, I'm the one that gets sunburned when no one else gets sunburned, I'm the one that has these things that, like, I don't look like anyone else, I'm very socially different than everyone else. It just, yeah, it's a huge difference. And you can't help but feel like the black sheep, and feeling like, again, that whatever life I have, whatever complicated feelings I have, whether positive, negative, both, or just negative, whatever. I felt like at every stage of my life, I had to be grateful. Like, I was this almost, like, I think I said in another podcast, that I was the poster child of open adoption. Like, I'm first generation open adoption kind of. It was only became a thing in the 1970s, and really was not popular at all for decades after that. And so to be one of the first generations, and to know that there's adoption agencies out there talking about open adoption, is great, because look at people like Connor. And it felt like I have to have this pressure of, even as a kid.
You had to almost make the dreams come true, the other people's dreams come true.
Yeah, I made the dreams come true. So I have to also be like, have my political attitudes on the pro-life, pro-choice stuff, because God wanted you to be in this family, even though I later learned in life my mom was never choosing between those two things. But as a kid growing up in the church, this is what I'm supposed to believe. And I think that was a big thing for me, is not necessarily that I disagree with every single detail of the beliefs of the people I grew up with, or who I consider family, but I never really felt like I was in a position to have my own experience. I felt like I really put into this position of, this is your role.
And as a child, you shouldn't be. And when I break down my book, I break it down into nurture, nature, and free will, backwards, because that's how I experienced it. Most people say nature, nurture, free will. My experience was, my nurturing was my first experience with the real world. But meanwhile, the program that was running in the background was all my nature, a lot of it. Those things that I got from my birth parents, those things that I got from generations and thousands of years before me. The eyebrows, the eyes, the personalities, the aptitudes. But you often, as you're being taught these things and you're surrounded by, I had my 2 grandparents, and then they had 4 children. And of those 4 children, there were 21 cousins in the next, or 13 cousins in the next generation. And then so everybody was biologic except for me and my sister. And I kind of place adoptees into 2 broad categories of hyper assimilator and rebel. And it seems to me that there are those people pleasers, those brown noses, that I feel like I became the ultimate Italian. Like, if there was something that had to be Italian, I was 130% Italian. There's always that overachiever mindset of, I can't just be me. In this role, I need to really emphasize and exaggerate that. Now, and I knew I was adopted. Some of my bombshells came later in life, when I found my birth parents, and the history I had been given, the ethnicity I'd been given, and the race that I'd been given ended up being different. So there's those early challenges and then the late challenges. Going back to your early years, like the fact that you knew your mother, did that give you some comfort in knowing your nature?
I would say I've heard a lot of adopted people talk about, close adopted people, I should say, that the first time they meet someone in their family and they have this profound feeling of, finally, I have genetic mirroring, and that changes everything for me because I see my mom's face. And for me, I don't want to say they're wrong necessarily. My experience, I had a picture of my mom on my bedside table. Like, I had at least one present that I remember that she gave me. She gave me like a necklace that I literally would never take off. And things like that meant a lot. Like, it meant a lot to know that she existed, but it didn't really feel like she was a part of my life. I probably saw her less than 5 hours a year. I feel like that for me wasn't really enough to feel like I would search for myself, I recognized it and sometimes I didn't. But definitely as I've gotten older in life and I have younger siblings in that family, I see my mom a lot. Like I really can see myself in my family to an extent where I feel like this is something that I didn't have for many years of my life. And now having a kid too, like I can see it in my kid's face. Like this is like family in a way that I've never experienced.
Right. What do you think? And I'm listening to both of you being adopted. What if you were loved and you had a great relationship? What kind of goes back to why wanting to know who your adopted parents? I've learned from you, Dr. Jack. This question's more for you, Connor. I mean, if I look at, I have a different belief system in the way family is not blood. It's family is who you can count on a regular basis every day. And if I had my adopted family, they did everything for me and it was a great relationship, what would make you think differently about yourself? Because
I think being adopted is a really unique, like feeling experience, something that I don't think people who haven't lived it can really put themselves in those shoes. I would equate it to like, I mean, you guys might be too old to be like big gamers or anything, but if you're creating a character in a video game, right, and you can choose the hair color, you can choose the eye color, like everyone who plays a game, I shouldn't say everyone, but most people that play a game and they have that choice to be like, okay, I want to make my guy look like this, whether it's funny, whether the guy looks like me, whether it's whatever. But in adoption, you don't like, I know that no one chooses the way they look, but you really don't like, it's just the way that I feel like I came out was just like sometimes you can press like a randomized button, like you press X and it's like random features and then you continue and it's who wants to play like that with a guy who has like giant blue afro or whatever and a guy that just looked like a complete mismatch. But that's how it feels like, at least for me, an adopted person growing up. I grew up in a family that like I could pass quote unquote as a biological child. I definitely don't look like them, but we're all white. So it's like, who's going to really be like, that guy's clearly adopted? Like it's people don't really look at you like that. But I think it's really a matter of not recognizing something in yourself that I think a lot of people take for granted. Like I have had this experience my whole life and it's not every night, but I mean, there are definitely plenty of times where I'm just looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like, what is this reflection looking back at me? Something doesn't look right. And it's not that I don't look wrong. There's definitely days where I'm like, I'm too fat or whatever, but like everyone has that feeling. But there's something about the way my eyes are, the way my eyebrows are, the way my mouth is. It's just something that feels totally intangible where it's like, why do I feel like this about looking at myself? It doesn't make sense.
Neil, I'm glad to see Neil put you under the gun, because when people put me under that same gun, it is an unexplainable feeling. It's that missing piece. It's that hole in your center that you can't scratch it. It's the itch you can't scratch. And we all hear the same stories, but the people that really make me believe that it's a thing are the NPEs. NPE, Neil, is considered, they call it non-parent expected. These are the guys in their 40s and 50s, men and women, that in their 40s and 50s, 60s, they suddenly find out that they were adopted. This whole time they thought they were a real kid, quote unquote, real kid. And for me, the Truman moment where you're like, something just wasn't right. For these NPEs, they've lived their whole life under this guise, under this. And the words we all use, like chameleon is looking in the mirror, staring in your eyes. It's something that all adoptees do. And those who aren't adoptees would never consider doing. So that there's something about that initial trauma that occurs upon separation from your birth mother, that the thing that's unique about it is that your brain is not fully developed. Your cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain that makes you human, is not fully developed. So basically, you just have a lizard brain. You have that brain stem, which teaches you how to breathe, eat, sleep, fart, all those basic functions, but it doesn't tell you to think. And you rely on your mother and you rely on your family. And then slowly, as your outer brain starts to develop, then you work into this self, this sense of self. And I think the early child, and it's very hard to study, but the inner child has this trauma that is deep-seated in their brain stem, so that when they're often triggered, it's at a guttural level. The trauma is at a guttural level. that is not explainable. Imagine as an infant who's been bonding with their mother for 9 months, and they've been hearing the voice, they've been feeling the electric, they've been just smells, tastes. A salmon know what stream to swim up. Our brains are much more complex than a salmon, but it's just that knowledge of yourself and that knowledge of your stream, your soil, your foundation. And then you're born, and instead of going back to that foundation and getting comfort and learning and training, you're taken from your stream. You're put in a fish bowl, you're put in an incubator, you're sent to an orphanage, you're sent to a foster home, you're sent to another foster home. And it's this bouncing around that really never allows you to merge that brain stem with the outer brain cortex, if that makes sense. I'm trying to explain it on a neurologic level, but it's very difficult, but it's something we all share. And I've been to, not many, but I've been to a few adoptee conferences where you have 30, 40, 100 other adoptees in the room. And everyone is yes. Whether it was a quote unquote good adoption, bad adoption, good upbringing, whether you're an assimilator or a rebel, there's that understanding of, yeah, I know what it's like to grow up without a left arm. It's almost a birth defect in a sense that you don't have your mother. You're not born with your cultural and genetic history. What do you think about that, Connor? You agree with just that? It's an unexplainable, it's an unscratchable itch.
Let me add one more thing going back to that question you asked, Neil, which is I would also say if you ever do like a DNA test on 23andMe, I've done a few of them. On 23andMe, they're able now to be like, this is 50% of you comes from this person, 50% of you comes from this person. You can even see 23andMe isn't going to know which one's your mom, which one's your dad. But I know, okay, my mom is this side, my dad is this side. And when you grow up and you're adopted, especially if you don't have access to one of your biological parents, like you're cut in half, right? I know this side of me comes from my mom, right? Okay, I have brown hair. My mom has brown hair. That's something I know that I could imagine that probably comes from someone. There's this other half of me that's just like a black question mark. Like, what do I know about myself besides that my dad's from Ireland? I don't know where in Ireland he's from. I don't know where he is. I don't know whether he's alive. I don't know if I have siblings. I don't know if I have grandparents. I don't know anything about that I come from. And going back to what you mentioned about family being chosen, like, I think it's very like, I don't have an issue necessarily with people saying, oh, family is chosen, but we refer to people as deadbeat dads. We talk about, oh, my family was this, my family was that. People who aren't adopted and have these normal experiences, in most cases, I would say, obviously in some cases, they'll say that person's not my parent anymore. They're just my sperm donor, whatever they want to say, whatever pejorative they come up with. But people still refer to those people as parents. They're like, oh, my dad should have been better. My mom should have been better. I feel like there's only really this desire to erase that familial connection when it comes to adoption. Adoption was going back to the way that it actually was conceived in this country. It was literally in the 1920s, it was basically not even a thing. It was a few adoptions per year at each adoption agency. I think like the Boston, whatever the one in Boston was doing like 5 adoptions per year, cost $7 to adopt. In today's money, that's like less than $200. And then a human trafficker came along named George Tan in the 1920s and decided that he could make a lot of money facilitating adoptions. And he basically commercialized adoption, turned it into a consumer-driven business, which is why adoption is so expensive today. It's why birth certificates were sealed, because originally she would kidnap children. And the way that she was able to conceal the crimes that she committed was by destroying that legal connection between the child and the parents that the child was kidnapped from. And so a lot of the modern practices that exist in adoption, even a lot of the cultural kind of ideas about what family is, like I wouldn't say that family isn't chosen to some degree. Like certainly my kid has 3 sets of grandparents, maybe 4 if my kid meets my dad one day. But I definitely agree that people should be able to choose family. But I think that there is a dangerous line when it comes to people talking about blood doesn't make a family, because blood, for most people, constitutes some level of family. It really is only used as a form of erasure when it comes to adoption, because when adoption was first becoming this big institution, like marketplace, it was advertised as, if we can cut this connection between the child and the family, this child is entirely yours. They're a blank slate. And I know that Jack mentioned in the beginning of his book, tabula rasa theory of, we can just pretend this kid came from nowhere, from no one, and present them as if they're born to you. And it's literally like, I have 2 birth certificates. One of them says that I was pushed out of one woman's womb, and then the other birth certificate says I was pushed out of a different woman's womb. It's a very interesting experience, but
yeah, it really is.
It just, adoption makes this really complicated family dynamic that every adopted person has to deal with, whether it's open or closed or whatever it looks like.
Yeah. And the other thing, Connor, let's get into the men's realm of things. One of your posts that you recently put out, I thought was fantastic. It was a woman talking about she had a relationship with an adopted man. And she was like, trashing adoptees, saying if you're going to date an adopted man, just beware. And I do think that I personally certainly had difficulties with relationships. Later in life, once you sift through the rubble and you're like, what the hell went wrong? Everything was perfect. What the hell went wrong? For me, it's, dude, I made it through residency. I made it through the military. I pledged a fraternity. I went through all these hardships. How hard could it be to get married? I'll get married and I'll just figure it out. When you're dealing with emotions and what I consider your nature, if you don't know yourself, how do you present yourself to another? So what are your thoughts on your experience and others' experiences you've heard as far as men and their relationships? Because men, we try to please others, I think. I make generalities often, which is probably not right for me to do. In general, I think men are seeking the attention of a female. You're going to put out your best foot forward. When you don't know what your best foot is, when you don't know yourself, you literally don't know yourself. And for me, the closed adoption system, you definitely didn't know yourself. You had no idea. My dreams of my birth parents went from living on a train as a hobo to being Queen of England. Who knows? Daddy Warbucks is going to show up someday. But I said, how do you deal with being in relationships when you don't really know yourself? Do you see that being an issue with men?
Yeah. Growing up, I feel like being adopted is crazy because you hear everything. I don't remember who or what in my life would say whatever things that were said about adopted people. But I definitely grew up believing that in that video you referenced, one of the things she said was she was like, and to be fair, she might have just been like drama farming or like trying to make a video that got a bunch of clicks or whatever. I try not to take things personal when I see them on the internet, but like she basically said something along the lines of adopted men have huge abandonment wounds and they're very bad at like handling rejection. I'm sorry if my kids make noise in the background. I don't know if you can tell that, but basically like for me, it's always been extremely difficult to tolerate rejection. I think my entire life has been shaped by my deep desire to avoid rejection at all costs. And obviously adoption, whether someone would argue it's an actual rejection or not, certainly to an infant and a child at the very least, it's some form of rejection, right? The infant, all of a sudden the mother isn't there, right? If you're a child and your mother's not there or your father's not there or both or whatever, like that can't, as a child, as a 5-year-old, maybe you have an adopted family that's really good at explaining that stuff, but I have a kid who's like almost 3. I can't imagine trying to explain to a kid in a year, oh, by the way, here's how all of that happened in a way that the child doesn't feel some form of rejection. And I remember growing up and playing sports and I was really good at basketball. And the second it became too much and I felt I wasn't going to be where I expected to be, and like I felt like it was a rejection from my coaches that I'm not going to be on the JV team freshman year, I quit the day high school basketball started when I was basically on track to play college basketball. And I think things like that, I can look back in my life and just see every single thing that I did was not every, but like every major decision I feel like I made in my life was an attempt to avoid some form of rejection. I remember going to college and wanting to go, like, I wanted to be as far away from where I grew up, San Diego, as possible, because I just don't want to be anywhere near like my adoptive family that I grew up with. Nothing against them personally. I just wanted to do my own thing. And I went as far away as I could to Los Angeles. Like, I mean, I could not bring myself to do something that I wanted to do because I was afraid that if I went too far away from home that I would be rejected by people who, there were definitely times in my life where I felt like a rejection would be coming from them based on things they may have said or done. But like there was always this rejection fear in the back of my head. And I think as a kid and when you grow up hearing that the reason that you're adopted is because you like, in that video, again, the reference back, there's something she said about like the people who are adopted. Oh, your parents knew what you were going to turn out to be. And that's why they relinquished you for adoption. And obviously that's just an impossibility, right? My mom doesn't feel like this evil inside of me when she's pregnant with me. Like whatever pregnancy decisions she makes has to do with her or me or what she wants for her or what she wants for me. It's not like she feels this evil inside of this evil child that she knows is going to be bad. So let me get rid of this child and push him on to someone else. That's just not the way that adoption decision making works. But when you're a kid, you can grow up feeling like the reason why I was adopted is because my parents knew that I was faulty.
And these are, like you said, you're misinterpreting things that are intended to be good. But what about I had one of my friends from high school after the book came out. He said something like, he goes, Jack, I was thinking back and I remember senior year when you told me you were adopted, I was like, no way, you're not adopted. So he goes, and then he told me, he goes, I'm going to start calling you the trash can kid. And I'm like, nah, I wasn't the trash can kid. But then you brush those things off and who knows where they launch. We try to keep little short interviews here, Connor. We appreciate you being here. And we can have you back to talk about more because I just really wanted to introduce you to the ultimate men's movement as a man, as a young man, as a open adoption. I thought you and I contrasted well for trying to explain. But I do think like the number of men, boys out there who were adopted, and if not adopted, still some element of childhood trauma that they carry with them. And I think the way men deal with them in that post really highlighted, because if someone has a girl that's adopted, it's more of a compassionate thing. Oh, this girl was given up, but she was taken into her family. But with boys, and especially this woman's comments, she's, hey, your mother didn't even want you. What makes you think that I would want you, kind of thing. I think men, they take those things and they swallow them, like a lot of things that guys do. And when you look at, we talk about suicide risk and wounded warriors and a lot of things. And men, when they act on those things, they act on them in general. But for me, you got your male increase in suicide risk. I've got my military risk. There's physicians who have risk. And adoptees. Anytime you go through these things, male adoptees have higher rates, higher risks. And I think a lot of it is just because men don't express those needs. For anyone in our audience who is adopted, was adopted, has some connection to it, as men, I do think that some of these childhood traumas that occur to men are handled differently. Once again, without the support, without the comfort in expressing those questions and concerns and inadequacies that we feel. But thank you for coming on. And I would encourage everyone to follow Connor's website because he, like I said, he pulls no punches. We like guys on this show who don't pull punches. We're not necessarily PC. When I told Zinta, I don't know if you know her from online, but I was talking to her earlier and I said, adoptee Connor is going to be on my show. And she's a smart cookie, that guy. And he calls it like it is. People respect and appreciate the messages that you put out. But how do people follow you if they want to learn more about some of your passions that you put out?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Anyone can find me online at Adopted Connor. I always caveat it with not everyone wants to see a bunch of negative stuff about adoption all the time. No pressure to follow me at all. It definitely, I treat like what I do as advocacy. And one thing I want to say is along the lines of what you're saying at the very end, Jack, about childhood trauma and men and all this stuff is like you said, like adopted people in general, but obviously adopted men as well are super overrepresented in a lot of mental health issues in the criminal justice system, in the juvenile justice system, suicide risk and all that stuff. And I think a lot of people look at it as, and this probably applies to all childhood trauma, is the way that we usually respond is usually with like anger and aggression. And I think a lot of parents look at those responses and think, yeah, he's a boy. That's what they do, right? A girl is going to cry. A girl is going to sit back or do something that maybe is more tangibly, oh, something might be wrong with her. But I think a lot of parents are willing to just not really pay as much of attention to men's mental health issues when we're children because, yeah, it's just the way that our behaviors manifest or maybe the lack of seriousness. Because, yeah, like you said, men have to be men and we got to toughen up and all that stuff. And just, yeah, anyone who's out there listening, like you're not alone. And anyone who needs someone to talk to can always message me about adoption stuff or whatever we want to talk about. But yeah, find me on Adopted Connor if you want or not. It's no pressure. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. But you're right. Yeah, girls will cry and it's, oh, honey, come here. But boys will anger and lash out, and that's unacceptable. You get stuck in a corner and banished for life.
All right.
Thanks again.
All right, thanks, Connor. And remember to go to the ultimatemensmovement.com and the ultimatemensclinic.com in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
That was the special simulcast on the Haley Show and the Ultimate Men's Movement, guys.